Hello everyone and welcome back to DC Central, and in today's video we're going to be breaking down and reviewing Arrow Season 8 Episode 6, otherwise entitled Reset, and if you have not seen this episode, make sure you go and do so before proceeding with this review, as it will be filled with spoilers. So I feel like I've been saying this a lot recently, but I'll go ahead and say it again. I apologize for the lack of videos, especially over the last couple of weeks. I have been so busy, like being out every single night doing things, just having different plans and things like that with different people. Also, in this week in particular, I've been away in London for a lot of the week, so I've not been able to have access to my laptop or anything like that. Like I only actually just watched this episode of Arrow yesterday as of recording this video, so I do apologize for the lack of videos both on this channel and my other channel. It's just been absolutely hectic in my life recently. I don't really know what's happened. I used to be so able to just make videos whenever, but that's just not been the case recently. But I do apologize for that, but with all that out of the way, let's jump into the review. So this episode I was really looking forward to for one reason, and that was that we had Paul Blackthorne returning as Quentin Lance. Now, Quentin Lance is one of my favorite characters on Arrow of all time. He's been there from the beginning. He's one of the characters I have the most emotional connection to. His death in Season 6 might be the saddest death I've experienced in the Arrowverse. It's either him or Martin Stein over in the crossover a couple of years ago. Like, one of those two is the most emotional, but when Lance died, it wrecked me. Like, I was so upset that Lance was killed. I mean, it made sense for him to die around this time, but it was really sad to see him go. I love Paul Blackthorne in the role, so to have Lance back here was fantastic. I just loved his role in this episode. I love the fact that he was really key and important. He wasn't just this random side character they brought back in. He was actually a really important role within this episode. He had a lot of screen time and a lot of great moments with not just Oliver, but also with Laurel as well. I really loved all those scenes between these characters, because Lance is just such a hard emotional edge for me, so to bring him back and put him in such a quintessential position was really appreciated, and I think that Lance and Paul Blackthorne both were just really well done in this episode. Now, this episode essentially is the Groundhog Day episode for Arrow. I mean, most of the Arrowverse shows have done a Groundhog Day episode at this point. Legends of Tomorrow did one, Flash did one last season, so Arrow's finally doing one here. And the whole story is that basically they have to protect Lance. If Lance dies, then the day resets. So, you know, Oliver has to keep thinking that, oh, you know, I have to save Lance, that's what has to be, that's what has to happen. If I save him, his fate will be changed, blah, blah, blah. But that actually isn't the case, and I really like the message of this episode, which is that it was all about Oliver having to accept the fact that he can't change fate. You know, Lance died, that was where he was supposed to die, you know, back in Season 6. He can't change that. No matter what he does, no matter how the situation plays out, he can't change that. And that can then be relayed to the fact that he can't stop his own death. He has to accept the fact that he is going to die in crisis, and he can't do anything to stop that. And I really like that message of this episode, and it really played well into this Groundhog Day scenario that they introduced into this. And again, making Lance the key of that, like making him the main focal point, I think was really selling, because having Lance back in this episode could have been an easy throwaway character. He could have just been a side character like he was for most of the show, to be honest. But no, they actually made him a really quintessential part of this episode, and I love that. And building the message kind of around him to link it back into Oliver's death was really a nice touch. This episode also gave us the chance for Laurel to say goodbye to Quentin. Obviously, Laurel never got the chance. Quentin died saving her. He took a bullet for her, and she never really got to say goodbye to him. And it was really nice to get that moment. Like, Katie Cassidy, again, knocking it out of the park every single week, not only with the dialogue and her delivery, but in this particular episode, the emotion of it. Like, you know, she really did a good job with the emotion in episode 2 of this season. Once again, she brings it home here. You know, especially there's a scene where, you know, it's kind of like Lance's final death, I guess you could call it, like his actual death. And when Laurel gets to say goodbye to him, it's just so emotional. Like, you can see how torn up she is, and you can see how Laurel has really grown as a character to the point where she really accepted this version of Quentin, you know, the Earth 1 Quentin, to be her father. And Quentin had accepted Earth 2 Laurel as his daughter, and you really bought the fact that they were father and daughter at this point. In this particular, you know, reality, this timeline, whatever you want to call it. It was just a really nice scene, and again, really emotional. Like, I was definitely welling up and tearing up in this. Just, I mean, any scene with Quentin really gets me, but especially because it was with Laurel, seeing them just kind of get to have that final scene together. It felt really special, and again, it was kind of like Laurel's reward from the Monitor for not betraying Oliver last episode, and I think that, again, it just shows how far Laurel has come as a character, to the point where, you know, last episode she could have easily betrayed Oliver under the pretense that she would have gotten Earth 2 restored, but she didn't, and she wanted to remain the hero that she has become. And I just think it's a really good arc for Laurel that she's had, you know, sort of since season 5, and I just love it, and this, you know, was really her reward for all of that work. So the MVPs of this episode were definitely Laurel and Quentin, but I also want to mention another MVP in this episode, which was David Ramsey, who of course plays Diggle. Diggle is not in this episode very much, but the reason why I bring up David Ramsey is that he of course directed this episode. This is his second episode he directed. He also directed episode 11 of last season. Now David Ramsey, I think, did a great job with this. This was quite a big step up in my opinion from the last episode he directed. The last episode he directed in season 7 was good, but it wasn't particularly anything outstanding, I don't think. This episode really knocked it out of the park. Like, I'll tell you sort of where this episode lies in my ranking of the episode so far in a little bit. But what I will say is this is definitely one of my favorite episodes of the season, and there's a particular action scene with Oliver and Quentin where it's basically them two teamed up, which is not something we really got to see often when he was alive, but it was them two side by side fighting. That fight scene was incredibly well directed, and especially because this episode really had to line up a lot of shots. Like, it really had to, you know, being the Groundhog Day thing, it really had to line up a lot of shots, and, you know, especially David having to direct Steven to kind of, you know, retrace his steps in a lot of ways. I think this episode is really well directed, actually, and I think that David Ramsey really deserves a lot of attention here. Obviously, he won't be directing any more episodes this season, but I'd love it if they brought him back to direct some episodes of the Green Arrow and the Canary spin-off show, or even if he went over and did an episode of Flash or whatever. He just went over to the other shows and just started directing, because David Ramsey's really got talent for this, and I really saw that in this episode. Again, his episode last season didn't really stand out to me, but this one in particular really did, especially that action scene. I was really kind of floored by it, because not only was it a really exciting action sequence and a really fun one, but the way it was shot and the way it was directed was really competently handled, and I think that David Ramsey deserves a lot of credit for that, and a lot of credit for this episode as a whole. And the ending of this episode really sets up the next episode very, very well. We see Oliver and Laurel finally break out of the Groundhog Day scenario, and they actually end up on a camp in Lian-Yu. Now, Lian-Yu, of course, being the island that Oliver was trapped on for 5 years, or well, 3 years. But it was really cool to actually land us back here, because the next episode of Arrow really is kind of the last proper episode of Arrow that we have, because obviously episode 8 will be Crisis, episode 9 will be the backdoor pilot, and then episode 10 will be the actual series finale. Episode 7 really is going to be the last proper episode we have of Arrow, and it's kind of fitting, really, for the last proper episode of Arrow to end where it started on Lian-Yu. Also, we do know about some plot points about next episode. We do know that Edward Fires is going to be returning, who was like the main flashback villain of season 1. He's coming back, which is kind of crazy. Billy Wintergreen is also coming back, who was like the original OG Deathstroke on the show from the flashbacks, if you remember him. Also, the big one coming back next week is my boy Byron Mann is coming back as Yao Fei. Love that Yao Fei's coming back. That's amazing. So I think that, you know, this final episode is really going to be like a throwback to the flashbacks of season 1. And also, we do know that all the characters from the show are basically going to be on Lian-Yu. Like, at the end of the episode, not only was Laurel there, Oliver, but we also saw Diggle, William, Mia, and Connor. But we also know from the promo photos that Dinah and Renee are also going to be here. So all these characters are going to be on Lian-Yu and going to be fighting against Edward Fires and Billy Wintergreen's army, which, again, it just feels so fitting for the final proper episode of Arrow to end where it all started on Lian-Yu against, you know, Edward Fires and Billy Wintergreen and his army. It just makes a lot of sense, and it just feels really fitting and really appropriate to end Arrow where it started, because as Oliver says in the promo for the episode, there are no more stories of the Green Arrow to tell. Overall, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think that Reset is my second favorite episode of the season, just resting under episode 1. I mean, I think that this episode, like, I loved the concept. Like, I love a good Groundhog Day episode. Every time the Arrowverse does it, I love it. Like, especially, like, the Legends of Tomorrow one was brilliant. Flash, not so much, but Legends was great. So I do enjoy a good Groundhog Day scenario, you know, episode of a show or Groundhog Day movie. I really enjoy that type of story, and I love the fact that the key to this story was Lance, and I'm bringing Quentin back, bringing Paul Blackthorne back to make him such a key part of the episode was really special to me personally. I really loved how he was able to be brought in and introduced here. He just did a really good job, and I think the Paul Blackthorne was a real MVP, a real standout, as was Katie Cassidy once again as Laurel. Stephen Amell was also great in this episode. He got a lot of great scenes with Quentin, especially his kind of goodbye scenes to him was really nice, really well done, really well executed. And again, David Ramsey, fantastic job directing this. Such a big step up from his last directorial debut. I think that he deserves a lot of credit for this episode. So overall, again, I loved Reset. Great episode. I had a lot of fun with it. A lot of emotional moments too. A lot of great action. And this is overall my second favorite episode of Season 8. But what did you guys think about this episode? Make sure you let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. How do you feel about it? And how does it rank among the other episodes of Season 8 for you? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you want to see more DC content just like this, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an upload from me. And I hope to see you guys again next time.